The courtroom, defendants present in court with counsel. Anything reckless today?
No, Your Honor.
Anything reckless?
No, Your Honor.
Madam Sheriff, you may invite the jury in.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Scott, what's that?
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Scott, before we broke for lunch, we were talking about some of the internal examination that you did in Mr. Perez's body, and you said that aside from the wounds that we've already talked about, that he had an enlarged heart, chronic bronchitis. There was evidence of coronary artery disease.
Yes.
Were there other things that you saw as well that were health issues with Mr. Perez?
There was a large amount of scar tissue in the abdomen consistent with some previous surgeries. There was a small stone in one of the kidneys and an enlarged prostate. I think that was the extent of what I saw.
And would you characterize the coronary artery disease that Mr. Perez had as being serious or severe?
It was severe. As I mentioned before the break, there was a stent in one of the arteries to keep the artery open, so there was severe enough disease that he, at some point in his past, had to have some medical intervention for it.
And given your knowledge and experience as an ME, do you have an opinion as to the cause of death of Mr. Perez?
I do.
And what would that be?
Multiple stab wounds.
And ultimately, what was it that, from those stab wounds, what caused his death?
A hemorrhage from the injuries from the stab wounds.
And are you able to, or how would you characterize the attack on Mr. Perez from the nature and number of the wounds that you observed?
Not sure I quite understand the question.
Was there anything about any of the particular injuries that you saw to his body that you would characterize as having required a great deal of force or strength?
Would have taken a lot of force to completely fracture the lower jawbone, since that is a very strong bone.
And you said earlier that the stab wound to his heart, to his lung, and to his carotid artery would have caused massive, rapid blood loss. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that the brachial vein injury, if untreated, could have or would have eventually been fatal as well.
Could potentially. That's not as definite as the others to have been fatal.
And his death, however, was not instantaneous from any of those individual injuries. Would that be fair?
It wouldn't have been instantaneous, no.
Would he have been conscious for some period of time?
It's difficult to tell. It depends on so many individual physiologic factors. Likely he would have been conscious for some period of time. It depends on the order of the wounds and were the more minor wounds inflicted first or the more severe wounds inflicted first. It just depends on a lot of factors, so there's no definite way to tell.
If he would have been conscious for some period of time after these wounds were inflicted, would it be fair to say that he would have been able to feel each of the stab wounds?
Objection on irrelevance.
Okay.
Can you estimate, based on your experience as a doctor, approximately how long it would have been likely that Mr. Perez would have survived after all of the wounds that he had were inflicted?
And there's so many different factors at play here that I can't give a definite time frame. It likely would have been on the order of minutes, probably not more than hours, given the extent of his injuries.
Closer to minutes than hours?
Probably, most likely.
And given the extent of the injuries and the blood loss from those injuries, would he been able to walk or go very far after all of those injuries had been inflicted?
Again, it depends on too many different individual physiologic factors to really say for sure.
Earlier today, a doctor who treated Mr. Perez from the VA hospital testified about some health problems that he had that would have affected his, whether he could walk easily or well or run or sustain activity, including the lung problems that he had, and also that he had carpal tunnel as well as diabetic neuropathy. Are those things that you could easily detect from an autopsy?
You cannot detect the carpal tunnel syndrome or the diabetic neuropathy from an autopsy. That's more of a physiologic thing that requires someone to be alive to really delineate.
And could you tell, you mentioned earlier that one of the wounds on Mr. Perez's one of his hands may well have been inflicted on him after he had died. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there anything about any of the other wounds present on his body where you could make a determination as to whether or not they might have been inflicted post-mortem rather than when he was still alive?
There's no definite way to tell. I can say that all the other wounds were inflicted at around the time of death because they all had a tissue reaction, namely they were all hemorrhagic.
And those are all the questions I have.
Witness with defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Scott.
Good afternoon.
All right, I'm just going to walk you through just a few questions here. Going through your report, and you mentioned sharp force injury A. And that was the wound on the left-hand side of Jose Perez's neck?
Yes.
And it was one of the, I guess all these, there are varying degrees of severity in these wounds, correct?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that this was one of the more serious ones?
It was a wound that would have taken more force to inflict.
Okay. And this wound is on his neck?
It was along the left jawline.
Left jawline? So right here, approximately? Yes. And you said the wound is coming from, I guess, backwards to forwards? Is that the wound track?
Yes.
And I guess you said, when you say in your report, the scene is left to right, so coming across from the left-hand side of his body to the right-hand side of his
yes.
body. And this wound is about 1.5 inches deep.
Yes.
I'm going to come back to B. We'll skip to C. And would it be fair to say that this is the, I guess, one of the more major injuries that Jose Perez sustained?
Yes, injury C was the injury on the right side of the neck, which damaged the carotid artery.
Okay. And it followed a similar track from the wound A, correct? It was just on the other side of his neck.
Yes, it was also back to front.
Okay, back to front, coming here, and this was a little lower, but still on the jawline. Back to front, correct?
Yes.
Now, looking at wounds D and E, those were the injuries to his face right above C, correct?
Yes, those were the 2 sharp force injuries right on the right cheek.
And so right above C, D, and E on the right cheek.
Yes.
And those were, you termed them to be superficial injuries, correct?
Yes.
And so those were a lot more shallow than any injury sustained in A and C.
Correct.
I believe you said those injuries were a fourth of an inch deep.
Yes.
Now looking at sharp injury I. That was on Mr. Perez's left shoulder.
Yes.
And what it means, when you put in your report, a horizontal stab wound with 2 rounded tips, what do you mean by rounded tips?
The 2 edges of the wound were rounded rather than being angled.
Yeah. Does that mean anything in your analysis, or is it just for descriptive purposes?
It usually doesn't mean much. Even a knife with 2 sharp ends can leave a wound with 2 rounded tips if inserted at a certain angle.
And just through all of your knowledge, experience, and training, you can't tell this jury with any degree of certainty the position of the people, Mr. Perez and Ms. Madonna, while this fight occurred.
No.
And this was a deeper wound as well. It was 2.5 inches deep.
Yes.
And this is the one that broke the clavicle, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm using the wrong bone term, but is that correct, clavicle?
Yes.
And that's the injury you showed where the jury ended up seeing like an inside shot of Mr. Perez.
Yes, it left that small defect in the clavicle or collarbone.
I know Ms. Shandos was talking to you about the amount of force that it would have taken to, to break the jawbone and to break the clavicle. But you don't know what kind of weapon was used at that point in time when you were doing your examination, do you?
No.
And you don't know the height, weight, strength of the person that inflicted the stab wound, do you?
No.
And you don't know the sharpness of the knife or the sharpness of the instrument or the heft and weight of that instrument, do you?
No.
So all of those would be variables that have to determine how much pressure or force would be needed to break a clavicle or break a jawbone.
Correct.
Just through your training and experience, when a person gets attacked, adrenaline starts pumping in their body, correct?
Yes.
And adrenaline is the typical, you learn in school, the fight or flight mechanism, chemicals pump from your brain into your body, correct?
Yes.
And I guess some people say they give you superhuman strength or being able to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do, correct?
There are reports of that, yes.
There are reports of that, but adrenaline is a real thing. It's just not a science fiction creation.
It's a real substance.
So what does this substance do what does it do to the body once it's going through it?
It causes the heart rate to increase, the blood pressure to increase, the vessels to constrict or dilate depending on where they're going to.
Okay. And like you said, just anecdotally, people end up doing things they aren't typically able to do through the use of their adrenaline.
There have been reports of it, yes.
And adrenaline occurs when people are in tense situations, including being attacked.
Yes.
Back to the injuries again. you note a sharp injury K to the lower back of Mr. Perez.
Yes.
And that was on his right lower back.
Yes.
So I guess around this area.
Yes.
I guess we'll give them two different views. But correct me if I'm pointing to the wrong view of myself. And that injury was about 2 inches deep.
Yes.
And then moving on to sharp force injury L that was on the left middle of the back.
Yes.
Can you point that out on yourself for the jury?
That was somewhere around that location.
And that injury was a very shallow injury, correct?
Yes.
Less than 1/16 of an inch deep.
Yes.
Then we have sharp force injury M that was also an injury to the right mid, well, excuse me, not also, but an injury to the right mid back.
Yes.
And that injury was 2 inches deep, and that's what penetrated Mr. Perez's lung, correct?
Correct.
And then was injury, how far from injury M was injury N?
Injury N was higher than injury M. It's about 2.5 inches higher up and slightly closer, I don't know, about the same distance to the midline as the injury M.
Okay. And injury N is 0.5 inches in depth, correct? Oh, excuse me. You said, well, excuse me, about 1 inch.
1 inch, yes.
Okay, excuse me. I was speaking of injury O. Where is injury O in relation to injuries M, N, and M and N, excuse me?
So injury O is farther to the side of the back and I believe at about the same height as injury N, higher than injury M.
Okay. And this is the injury that has a depth of about 0.5 inches.
Yes.
So we have injuries all over Mr. Perez with, I guess, varying degrees of severity and depth to the wounds, correct?
Yes.
Don't think look, let me go back to injury, which one I skipped? B?
Yes.
Yes. And that is the injury that you said from the cheek injury, correct?
Yes, on the left cheek.
Which was above injury A?
Yes.
Okay. And like I said, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong in the position of these. And this injury had a depth of at least 0.5 inches?
Yes. Can't tell on this one exactly how far it went in since it went into the oral cavity, which is a space rather than a area where there's tissue.
So you're just going through the cheek, and that's as far as you can determine
Yes.
it went. And I know with Ms. Shandles, you were saying that it may represent, you were telling Ms. Shandles that it was a stab wound, correct?
It's possibly a stab wound or possibly a wound from part of the mandible tearing through the cheek, part of the jawbone tearing through the cheek.
And so, but you're not sure whether it was maybe entrance and exit wound might not be scientifically correct, but you weren't able to tell whether it was an injury that was coming in or going out because of the bony fragments
Correct.
coming out of the mouth. So you're not even sure that it was are you sure it was a stab wound? Can you say with any degree of medical certainty that that was a stab wound?
It looked more like a stab wound, but I can't rule out that it was part of the ragged jawbone going outwards.
In talking to Ms. Shandles, you also recovered a set of dentures that had been, I guess, destroyed might not be the correct word, but well, what position or what condition were the dentures were when you recovered them?
They were fractured.
Okay, fractured it would probably be a good word. And you said that the dentures being broken happened secondary to any trauma created by any of these sharp force injuries, correct?
Yes, likely from the force of one of these sharp force injuries.
Well, are you saying it's secondary or that it happened because of these sharp force injuries? Or are you unable to tell?
More likely because of the sharp force injury, but I can't tell definitively.
Okay. Did you get any information about Mr. Perez being shot?
I did.
Is it possible that the broken dentures could have been a result of Mr. Perez being shot?
I considered that when I was performing the autopsy, that this injury in the left jawline area could have represented a gunshot wound rather than a sharp force injury, but the characteristic of the jawbone being sliced rather cleanly in half was more consistent with a sharp force object than a gunshot wound, which tends to more fragment the bone.
But you're not able to tell.
I can't tell with 100% certainty, but it's more likely than not that this was from a sharp force injury.
Is more likely than not anything that you would be willing to, you think it's just more likely than not that it happened, but you can't be sure?
Correct.
And if the police had told you that they recovered a bullet with blood on it, how would that inform your opinion about whether Mr. Perez had been shot?
There was an additional injury on the back of the neck, which I mentioned, which was more consistent with the gunshot wound, so it's possible that the shot would have come from the back of the neck rather than from this injury here.
But you were telling Ms. Shandles when you're going through that graze wound that we can start talking about now, that there were some characteristics of that didn't look like a graze wound, correct?
Correct.
So what are the characteristics about it that don't look like a graze wound when you're talking to Ms. Shandles?
It wasn't incredibly deep. With the graze wound, it's difficult to tell if it's actually from a bullet since it's a superficial injury. And this wound on the back of his neck was also dried out, which prevented me from definitively saying that it was from a gunshot wound.
So is it now that it's more likely that that was a gunshot wound when you're talking to Ms. Shandles, you said that it's probably not a gunshot wound?
Objection.
I don't think I said it probably wasn't a gunshot wound.
You said it wasn't characteristic with a gunshot wound when you were talking to the state, correct? There were characteristics about that wound that didn't make it look like a grazed gunshot wound, correct?
It wasn't a definitive grazed gunshot wound, but it was consistent with it.
But there were characteristics that gave you doubt about that too, correct?
Yes.
So on both of these injuries, you can't definitively state where they came from, correct?
Correct.
And if the police had showed you that this bullet had blood on it and it also had a deformation on it where it impacted something, how would that inform your opinion about whether Mr. Perez sustained a wound through a gunshot?
It wouldn't necessarily change it because it depends where they recovered the projectile. If it was just near the body, it could have been from blood leaking out one of the other wounds.
If it wasn't found near the body, it was found in the car with no other gunshot, evidence of the gun being used there, and it was deformed, so it wasn't found in blood. How does that affect your opinion now since you offered that?
It depends where the bullet originated from.
So we have a lot of stuff that is hard to tell.
Exactly.
And it could have been a gunshot wound. You can't say. You don't know. You don't know how his dentures got fractured.
Most likely it was from a sharp force injury, given the characteristic on the lower jawbone of being cleanly cut rather than fragmented. But I can't say for 100% sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Have the pictures of Mr. Perez there?
I do not.
Okay. If Your Honor, may I approach that?
Yes.
And Dr. Scott, I've given you Exhibits 53, which you had with the state beforehand, and then also State's Exhibit number 4, which are pictures of Joanna Madonna. If you can go first to 5329.
Okay.
And is that's the picture of the right wrist wound, correct?
Yes.
And you said that that one could have been after death?
Yes.
And that's the one you're talking about with Ms. Shandles. You can't tell if it's blunt or sharp or anything like that.
Correct.
And in looking at that wound, it kind of looks like a person that fell down and maybe skint their knee, but not their knee, or fell and hurt their wrist. Is that something that, or fell and kind of skint their wrist? Is that appropriate?
It looks like it either could be an abrasion, which is what you're describing,
what I'm trying to
or a
describe.
sharp force injury, and I can't tell which.
It's not a clean slice that would typically indicate a sharp force injury, is it?
Part of it looks like it's cleanly sliced, and part of it looks more ragged, which is why I can't tell definitively.
And then if you could go to 5328.
Okay.
And what are you looking at there?
This is the back of the right hand with a sharp force injury just above the knuckles.
And you determined that to be a kind of superficial type wound, correct?
Yes.
All right. If you could look at 4 and go through 112 to 122, and just let me know after you flip through those. And when you were talking to Ms. Shandles, you said that that small abrasion that we were talking about at 528 was a defensive type wound, correct?
Yes, we call them defensive type because there's no way to tell whether it was actually
You can't tell whether it was defensive or
gotten
not.
when somebody was defending themselves.
Okay. And what the pictures I just had you look through in 4-112 and 4-122, what are those?
There are pictures of the hands and a forearm. There is one sharp force injury on a left forearm and another sharp force injury on one of the fingertips.
Okay. And those are female pictures, correct? I don't know if I had you go back far enough to see who they are.
I don't know if I can tell that from sure for
Okay.
these pictures.
You weren't there yesterday. You weren't here yesterday to see that. Can you go back to 492 first?
Okay.
And what is that a picture of?
A close-up of a female face.
Okay. Does that female face appear to be Joanna Madonna?
Yes.
And then go back to 4-120.
Yes.
And what is that there?
That is 4 fingers, and there's a close-up of a superficial, well, I assume it's superficial, sharp force cutting injury on one of the fingertips.
So these sharp force cutting injuries that Ms. Madonna sustained are also defensive type injuries, aren't they?
They could be called defensive type because they are on the hands and forearms, which is why we again call them defensive type, because we don't know for sure that they are defense wounds.
And that's on both sides of the...
Correct.
When you were talking to Ms. Shandles about taking aorta blood in order to do toxicology on it,
Yes.
and you said the toxicology was negative on that aorta blood.
For alcohol only.
For alcohol.
They did not test for any other substances.
Do you know why they didn't test for any other substances?
It's our lab's policy to not test for anything other than alcohol if there's an obvious cause of death and no one else requests anything.
That's fair. And what other, obviously Mr. Perez lost a lot of blood, correct?
Yes.
How would that factor into a toxicology report being accurate when he had lost that amount of blood?
For this particular toxicology report, it shouldn't matter since it did not detect any alcohol.
Okay. So if they had raised a level or lowered a level, you said it wouldn't make a difference in that regard?
Correct.
Okay. And would it make any difference that the body had been out there, I guess 2 days before, or excuse me, Mr. Perez had been deceased for at least 2 days before you performed this examination?
Bodies can actually produce alcohol through decomposition, so if it had been positive, then I would have to say I'm not sure if it's positive because of decomposition or for some other reason, but since it's negative, that shouldn't affect anything.
And the body producing alcohol, and that's extremely rare, is that correct?
With 2 days, it's pretty rare. We generally see it when people have been dead for longer periods of time than that.
And they took other, was there any particular reason that they took aorta blood as opposed to any other?
Our standard is to take a sample of aorta blood and a sample of peripheral blood from one of the major veins that goes down into the legs, and they tend to test the aorta blood first.
Peripheral blood is typically more accurate than the aorta blood in this situation, is it not?
Yes, so if there was a positive result for alcohol, they would also test the peripheral blood to make sure that the 2 levels were about equivalent.
And did you also take a gunshot residue kit from Mr. Perez?
Yes.
What does that involve?
It involves swabbing the hands with a solution and first taking a sticky pad and putting it on the surfaces of the hands.
And then you don't do any further analysis from there. You just collect that and then
No,
send
that's
it on.
collected and released to one of the investigators who then sends it to the State Bureau of Investigation.
So you at least had some information at that point in time that Mr. Perez had fired a weapon, or at least that's what an officer had told you.
Yes.
And just to clarify on the negative response to alcohol, you said that you wouldn't be able to tell anything within the last 24 hours. Your alcohol toxicology report would only be relevant for the past few hours, correct?
Correct.
John?
Correct.
Is it possible for you ever to say anything about injuries that you observe to a body with 100% certainty?
Occasionally, depending on the case. Usually Usually there's some degree of doubt in any examination.
And that's because you don't see the injuries inflicted, is that correct?
Correct.
But you spent 4 years in undergraduate school
Yes.
and 4 years in medical school
Yes.
and 3 or 4 years in your residency in pathology
Correct.
and another year in a fellowship in pathology.
Yes.
And the purpose of all that schooling that you go to is to learn how to make determinations to a medical certainty of the mechanism that's used to inflict injuries on bodies, isn't it?
Correct.
And in your opinion, to a medical certainty, Jose Perez was not shot in the arm, was he?
To a medical certainty, no.
And in your opinion, to a medical certainty, Jose Perez was not shot in the face?
No.
And the defense attorney asked you to look at some photographs of Miss Madonna, and you referred to some of the photographs as showing sharp force injuries on her arms. Is that correct?
Yes.
Those could have been put there by any sharp thing, correct?
By any object with a sharp cutting edge, yes.
And would you consider those to be superficial injuries to her?
From the pictures, they appear to be, but I'd need to kind of look at it in person to really say for sure.
They could have been self-inflicted, couldn't they?
Possibly.
Now, CCBI, there was a CCBI person present at the autopsy that you did of Mr. Perez, correct?
I believe so. I know I handed evidence to a CCBI agent.
Was it Shane Smithy?
Yes.
And one of the things that you gave to Shane Smithy from CCBI was a card with a blood stain on it with Jose's blood. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you also gave the gunshot residue kit after it was completed to Shane Smithy to take back to CCBI. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at some point later down the road, perhaps even several days or weeks later, you sent a second sample, a vial of blood, to the SBI DNA unit through a Wake County Sheriff's deputy. Is that correct?
I don't think that I sent that. I think that came direct from our toxicology lab.
So your tox lab gave a vial of blood to a Wake County Sheriff's office.
Yes.
And you talked with the DNA analyst at the SBI before that occurred, didn't you?
Don't think that I was the person who spoke with them.
Okay. But you knew that there was a second transmittal.
Yes.
And even though Mr. Perez's blood had already been tested and the autopsy was finished, do you retain certain samples for a period of time in cases where someone's been murdered?
Yes.
And how long do you usually keep those samples?
In all of our cases, regardless of whether or not it's a homicide, small sections of most of the organs are saved in a preservative solution for 5 years, and the fresh samples that we sent to toxicology of blood and liver are saved for 2 years.
And I had a little bit of trouble following some of Mr. Thomas's questions about the alcohol or lack of alcohol in Mr. Perez's system when toxicology tested his blood. From the result of that test, what can you say about Mr. Perez having consumed alcohol in the hours prior to his death?
There wasn't any alcohol consumption in the immediate, at least hour prior to his death.
And it could have been significantly longer than an hour before his death. Is that correct?
Could have been, but I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. And that's one of those things that because you didn't see it, you can't say.
Right.
I have no other questions.
Ms. Collins?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly. Dr. Scott, a deformed bullet with blood on it would tend to indicate that someone was shot, correct?
We tend to.
And the only wound on Jose Perez that penetrated all the way through something was that shot to his mouth, correct?
Objection. That's not the testimony.
Oh, she can answer.
That, to me, was more characteristic of a sharp force injury than a projectile injury.
If you can answer my question, that is the only wound that penetrated all the way through Jose Perez, correct?
From my categorization of the wound, it wasn't a perforating wound, I think is what you mean. It was a penetrating wound in that it went in and out, and then there was another in and out area of it.
Okay, so you could, if you were to take your finger and stick it in that wound, you could stick your finger inside Jose Perez's oral cavity, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Shandles talked about all the training experience training in school that you went through, and I appreciate that, but you're still a relatively new medical examiner, correct?
Relatively new.
All right, and you started when?
I finished all of my training in June of 2013.
So about a year and a half, 2 years?
Yes.
So you still have a lot to learn, correct?
I think we all have a lot to learn.
We all do. All right. And the wound in Mr. Perez's arm, you said maybe it looks like a gunshot, but that didn't go all the way through, correct?
No.
And I guess the timeline that you're giving us now for Jose Perez not consuming any alcohol was just limited to the immediate hour right before he passed, correct?
Yes.
And just based on Ms. Shandle's testimony, if he had lived for some minutes or hours or whatever, that would also take up some of that time too, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
There was another doctor present during the autopsy, wasn't there?
Yes, I was actually still in my final year of training when I performed this autopsy, so there was a doctor with more experience than me who looked at all of the injuries.
And that was Dr. Samuel Simmons?
Yes.
Did Dr. Simmons have any opinions different than yours?
No.
I have no other questions.
No question, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Stand down. Objection, have been released from the state.
Not from the state.
Objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Further
Thank you, Doctor.
discussion?
Your Honor, today we call Shane Smithy to the stand, please.
Raise your right. You solemnly swear testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Please be seated.
Vincent,
Thank you. Good afternoon, Agent Smithy. If you would, please state your name for the court.
Shane Smithy.
And how are you employed?
Currently, I'm employed as an investigation supervisor with the City County Bureau of Identification.
And as an investigation supervisor, we heard a lot yesterday about CCBI and what they do, but what specifically are your responsibilities?
I'm responsible for a squad of crime scene investigators. I also respond to crime scenes myself, document scenes, collect physical and latent evidence, and also document my findings in a written report.
And how long have you worked with CCBI?
Approximately 14 years.
And how long have you been a crime scene investigator supervisor?
Supervisor for about 2 years.
Were you employed and on duty on Monday, June 17th, 2013?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And as part of your duties on that day, was that prior to you becoming a supervisor, or do you remember?
It was just prior to, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And as part of your duties on that particular day, were you asked to attend an autopsy?
I was.
And could you tell us a little bit about what CCBI's role is in attending an autopsy?
Basically, our role there is to collect any evidence that the medical examiner collects from the body, whether it's clothing or projectiles from the body. They turn over that evidence to us so that we can collect it and do anything necessary to it once we have it.
And when you say do anything necessary to it, do you mean process it?
If there are evidence that needs to be processed, we'll further process it in our lab. Otherwise, we'll turn it back over to the investigating agency.
Okay. And when you were called to participate or to where an autopsy was occurring on June 17th, where exactly is that, or where do you go?
The medical examiner's office is located at 4312 District Drive here in Raleigh.
Okay. And tell us when you arrived there what you did or what your responsibility was.
Once I arrived, I made contact with, I believe, Dr. Lauren Scott with the medical examiner's office. Let her know that I was there for a particular case, and then she signed over evidence to me from that case.
Okay, and specifically, what did you collect as part of the autopsy of that case? Let me back up for just 1 minute. Were you provided a name of a victim for which the autopsy performed had been?
I was.
And who was that?
It was for Jose Perez.
Okay. Did you collect certain items as a result of you going there to the medical examiner's office?
Yes, I did.
And what items did you collect?
I collected one blood spot card from Jose Perez, a head hair sample from Jose Perez, a set of broken dentures, a sealed bag that contained a watch, a ring, and a wristband from Jose Perez, another sealed bag containing a shirt and a pair of boxer shorts from Jose Perez. I also collected a gunshot residue kit from the hands of Jose Perez, as well as post-mortem fingerprints from him.
And had these items been taken or had actually been collected during the process of the autopsy?
Some of them, yes.
Okay, so walk us through that. Which ones had already been collected and provided to you, and then what specifically did you do in collecting the others?
The blood spot card and the head hair sample, the clothing, and also the dentures were all collected from the medical examiner when the autopsy was being performed. Once the autopsy is finished, the body is then moved to a secure area, and we're then able to go in and collect post-mortem fingerprints from the body. And in this case, I also collected a gunshot residue kit from the hands of Jose Perez.
Okay, let's talk for just a minute, if you know, about what a blood spot card is.
It's a sample of blood taken from the body, and it's placed on a paper card and placed into an envelope just so that we would have a known DNA sample from the victim in this case.
And why might it be important to have a known DNA sample in a case?
Sometimes situations will arise where we need to make a comparison between a known standard and a sample that we may have from the crime scene. And if we have that blood spot card from the autopsy, we know that that's a known standard from the victim, and then we can later compare it if necessary.
I think we heard a little bit yesterday about kind of the role that CCBI plays compared to the role that the state crime lab plays, but when you talk about making that comparison, is that something that the state crime lab does as part of its DNA analysis?
It is. If we have two samples that we need compared, we'll send it to the state lab and they'll make the comparison.
Tell us a little bit about, it appears you also collected a watch, a ring, and a wristband. Were those collected during the course of the autopsy?
They were.
Okay. You've mentioned that you collected a gunshot residue kit. Can you tell us, first of all, why you decided to collect that?
At the time that the gunshot residue collection kit was performed, there weren't a whole lot of circumstances that were known. So in that case, we would take a gunshot residue kit just to eliminate any possibility of the victim having been around a firearm when it was discharged on this scene. So at this point, it's just a precautionary measure just in case we needed that piece of evidence later.
And what are the types of things that might lead to a victim having gunshot residue on them?
It could be that they fired a weapon. It could be that they were in close proximity of a weapon when it was fired, Either situation would lead to gunshot residue being on their hands or clothing.
And so tell us a little bit about exactly what that process is of collecting.
So the kit itself is a small box, and it contains several sample portions. There are small plastic containers that have an adhesive strip on one side, and there's a container each for the back of each hand and for the palm of each hand. And then there's also swabs that we take from the back of each hand and the palm of each hand. And we put those swabs into a plastic tube, and between the adhesive strips and the swabs, they're able to test those to test for gunshot residue.
And who actually performs those types of tests for the gunshot residue?
The state lab also will perform that test.
And so was that something that would be sent then to the state crime lab?
In some circumstances, yes. I'm not sure if this particular one was sent to the state lab. I'm not sure if that evidence ever became relevant or not.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, but does the presence of gunshot residue on a victim's hands mean that they have fired a weapon?
Not necessarily, no.
What other, you mentioned that you took, I believe, yourself some post-mortem fingerprints.
Yes.
And if you would, please explain what that is.
So what we do to collect the postmortem fingerprints is we take black magnetic fingerprint powder and rub it on the victim's hands, and then we'll take strips of contact paper and lay them over each individual finger, and then the whole hand to get a palm impression. And we use these fingerprints to be able to eliminate the victim's fingerprints in case we get fingerprints from a vehicle or another scene. That way we can eliminate the victim as being the person that left those fingerprints.
Going back for just a minute to the gunshot residue, are there restrictions on when you, or reasons when you might choose not to take a gunshot residue kit?
Yes, there are.
And can you tell us about those?
There is a time limit that I believe the state lab imposes on these kits, usually after 4 hours. It's usually not likely that the state lab will test a kit like that due to the fact that if the victim is alive, any gunshot residue that's left on their hands will dissipate. There's a higher chance that they could have washed their hands or that it's come off. So usually after 4 hours, most of the time on live victims, we won't perform that test.
Did you observe the dentures when you collected them at the autopsy?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Do you remember anything about their condition at the time you collected them?
I believe they were broken.
Okay. Now, I may approach.
Yes.
Can please identify for the court what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 34?
State's Exhibit 34 is a blood card from Jose Perez.
And how do you identify it to be such?
There is a white sticker on the front with Jose Perez's name on it. Actually, it's J. Perez. It's identified as CCBI 30 blood card. And there's also a red sticker marked State's Exhibit 34.
Okay. And when you were provided the blood card on June 17th, 2013, was it provided to you in an envelope, or how was it provided to you?
It was inside an envelope.
Okay. If I can approach, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
If you would just open what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 34.
It's actually open.
Is that the blood card that was provided to you on June 17th at the medical examiner's office of Jose Perez?
Yes, it was.
And it appeared to be in substantially the same condition.
Yes, it does.
Now, we would ask that State's Exhibit number 34 be admitted into evidence.
Ms. Jackson. Object, Your Honor. Mr. Lyle.
If I could ask you to identify what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 35.
State's Exhibit 35 is a set of broken dentures
Okay, and if you would please, how can you recognize that?
This particular piece of evidence has a CCBI evidence label on it with the case number, Jose Perez's name, and the item number.
And if you would please, Agent Smith, you go ahead and open State's Exhibit number 35.
You want me to open them all the way?
And can you identify what that is inside of that envelope?
It appears to be a broken set of dentures.
And how can you recognize it?
It looks to me like
Are
it's,
there any markings on the exterior envelope, the envelope that the dentures were actually in?
there is. There is a sticker with Jose Perez's name on it, as well as the words broken dentures.
Okay, and is that appear to be the packaging that was provided to you and the dentures that was provided to you on June 17th of 2013 at the medical examiner's office?
Yes, it does.
And is it in substantially the same condition as when you received it on that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, we would ask that State's Exhibit number 35 be admitted into evidence.
No objection. No objection, Your Honor. Mr. Lapp.
Agent Smith, if I could turn your attention to what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 36. Can you identify that for us, please?
State's Exhibit 36 is a GSR kit from the victim, Jose Perez.
And when you say GSR kit, for those of us who don't do this every day, what does that mean?
I'm sorry, that's a gunshot residue kit.
Thank you. And how do you identify it to be that?
There's a sticker on the front that is marked SBI 6, CCBI 35, GSR kit victim Jose Perez.
Okay, and if you would, please, ma'am, go ahead and open that. What do you recognize that to be?
This is a sealed envelope containing a gunshot residue evidence collection kit.
And is that the gunshot residue collection kit that you administered on June 17th, 2013 to collect any residue off of the victim, Jose Perez?
This is actually a kit collected by the medical examiner's office and turned over to me.
Okay. And do you recognize it to be in substantially the same condition as when it was turned over to you?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we would ask that State's Exhibit number 36 be admitted into evidence.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Are there times when the medical examiner might do the gunshot residue as opposed to asking y'all to do that? And what kind of makes that determination, if you know?
Usually, we will perform the test on the scene, but if there are extenuating circumstances, if for some reason it wasn't done at the scene, the body can be transported to the medical examiner's office where they can perform the test.
If at some point in the course of the investigation there's information that becomes available that that there might have been a firearm used, in close proximity to the victim. Is that an opportunity or a time when a gunshot residue might be ordered or asked for after a body has been moved to the medical examiner's office?
It could be, yes.
Turning your attention to what's been marked as State's Exhibit Number 37. Do you recognize that?
I do.
How do you recognize that, or what is it?
This is a CCBI evidence envelope with my handwriting, the case number, Jose Perez's name, and it is a set of postmortem fingerprints collected from Jose Perez.
Okay. And if you would go ahead and open that envelope, Agent Smithy. And what do you recognize those to be?
These are the postmortem palm prints from Jose Perez that I took, and also the postmortem fingerprints from Jose Perez that I collected.
And are they in substantially the same condition as when you collected them on June 17th, 2013?
Yes, they are.
All right, this time the state would ask that State's Exhibit Number 37 be admitted into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you, Agent Smithy. I have nothing
Yes,
further
ma'am.
at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Agent Smithy.
Good afternoon.
I just have a few questions for you. When you're talking about the 4-hour time limit for conducting a GSR test, that's only for living people, correct?
Correct.
Because living people, if you have gunshot residue in your hands and you go wash your hands as you would normally do or go touch a table, you're going to disperse that and get rid of it completely, correct? Or possibly get rid of it completely,
Correct.
That makes it a little bit different in this situation because if Jose Perez died there, then he obviously is not washing his hands and it hadn't rained or anything like that on him. So the presence of GSR may still be available, and that's why you're able to conduct this test.
Correct.
You talked a little bit about the ways gunshot residue can disperse, and I think you're familiar with this, but it's when the gunshot residue was mainly lead, antimony, and barium, I think it is, correct?
Correct.
And those are ejected from, I guess the chemicals kind of disperse, elements disperse whenever a gun is fired, correct?
Correct.
And if you're firing a weapon and you're pulling a trigger, not always, but it's highly likely that you will have gunshot residue on your hands.
Correct.
But you can also be, if you're standing around it, you may get some on your clothes or something like that, correct?
That's correct.
And it creates a little cloud, I guess, gun smoke cloud, and that's how you are able to establish GSR, correct?
Correct.
Agent Smithy?
Thank you.
Correct.
None, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, and you may stand now. Any objection to her being released from the stand?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
For the evidence,
Your Honor, the state would call Agent Tracy Lipscotch.
I swear the testimony you give this court should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Go around and have a seat, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, if you would please state your name for the court.
My name is Tracy Lipscotch. Last name is spelled Lipskoch.
And how are you employed?
I am currently a forensic examiner within the latent print unit of CCBI, and that stands for the City County Bureau of Identification.
Thank you. And Agent Lipscotch, how long have you worked for the City County Bureau of Identification, or CCBI as we refer to it?
Since October of 2008.
And what are your duties with CCBI at this time?
Like I said before, I'm a forensic examiner, so my duties would be to perform latent print examinations in order to determine if there is an identification. I supply notes, write reports, and testify in court when needed. I also run prints through the local and state databases when necessary and respond to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in order to obtain postmortem impressions. Currently, I'm a training officer for new latent examiners.
Okay. And we're going to break some of that down a little bit. When you say prints, you mean?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by?
You referred to that you run prints through the state and national database. Can you just briefly tell us what that means?
Sure. When our crime scene agents from CCBI respond to a scene, they collect latent prints, and I will go a little bit more into that in just a bit, but when they're collected from a scene, they arrive in an envelope, and I then run them through the databases. We have a local, state, and federal database, and it's kind of, if I could describe it like a Google search. We put the prints into the database, and it searches it through a database. I think the database holds over 500,000 cards into it of known prints. And it searches it and then comes back with a candidate list. And then we can use that to compare against known prints.
All right. Tell us about your background prior to working for CCBI. What positions did you hold?
Prior to working at CCBI, I was a crime scene investigator with the City of Durham Forensic Services Unit. I was there for about a year and a half. And then prior to that, I was a scientist with the analytical biochemistry labs.
Okay. What is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology through the University of Missouri. Since 2007, working with the City of Durham, I have over 1,000 hours of specialized training, with about 400 of those hours being within latent prints. I have my basic crime scene investigator certificate through the North Carolina Justice Academy. I'm also certified through the IAI, which is the International Association for Identification, in latent print examination. I'm also certified as a footwear examiner and a crime scene analyst.
Have you testified as an expert in a court of law as a latent print expert?
Yes, I have, in district, superior, and federal courts.
And approximately how many times?
I've been tendered as an expert 18 times, and I've testified close to 20.
Now, at this time, we would like to offer Agent Tracy Lipscotch as an expert in fingerprint, latent print analysis.
No objection, Your Honor.
Services.
Agent Lipscotch, in preparation for your testimony today, did you put together a presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and if I may approach your... Thank you. Would please identify for the court what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 38.
State's Exhibit 38 is the presentation that I've prepared for this court. court case.
And is it that which you submitted is in the same format at which you have submitted it? Any alterations or deletions to it?
Just one moment. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and will it assist you in giving your testimony today? Will it help illustrate your testimony to the jury?
Yes, ma'am, it would.
We would ask that State's Exhibit Number 38 be admitted into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
We would ask for authority to publish that to the jury, Your Honor,
Yes, ma'am.
and for the witness to step down. And
She may do so.
thank you. Your colleagues, Agent Thompson, who, as you know, collected a fair number of latent prints as part of this investigation. But if you would please tell us what a latent print is.
Okay, it's actually part of my presentation, so if you don't mind, I'm actually going to have it on the screen, and if you guys want to kind of read along as I go, and just let me know if you can't see or can't hear anything. And this will be my first time using the clicker, so just bear with me. Okay, so what is a latent print? An example of a latent print I actually have on the screen in the box. A latent print is a print that is hidden, it's often hard to see, and it's left behind by an individual on a crime scene. It needs some sort of further chemical enhancement oftentimes in order to visualize it. So on the surfaces of our fingers and our palms and on our feet on the bottom, we have friction-rich skin, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a minute. But that friction-rich skin has pores, and so the pores exude sweat. And so that sweat, along with other contaminants like oils when you rub your face, or dirt, or blood, or mud, can actually be transferred to a surface when you touch it, and it leaves that replication of friction-rich skin. So then that can bring us to what is a known print. And if you look up on the screen, that's just sort of an example of a temprint card, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But a known print is can be thought of as a control, where we know where these prints came from. So, like I said before, the friction-rich skin is on the undersides of your palms and fingers and feet. They allow us to grasp for things. And the easiest way I can explain that is if you have a Ruffles potato chip. You have ridges and valleys, ridges and valleys. Those ridges are what actually help us grasp. And we can actually record the friction-rich skin by applying ink or using a live scan machine. A live scan machine takes a digital copy of the friction-rich skin and then puts it on a temprint card. That temprint card we can actually then use to compare with a latent print.
Agent Lipscotch, if I could get you to slow down just a little bit. And I think you mentioned in that a live scan. Can you explain to us a little bit how that works?
Sure. A live scan, like I said before, is kind of an instrument that takes a digital copy. So it almost looks like a scanner or a copier where you place your hand onto a glass and it takes that digital copy of it, and then we can actually print out that temprint card when we need it. Temprint card basically holds your 10 fingers, so you can print out the replication of your friction-rich skin onto the temprint card, and that's what we know as the known.
In terms of, if I can back you up just for one moment about latent prints, what affects the quality of a latent print or of somebody leaving a fingerprint somewhere?
Multiple things can actually affect the latent print being left on the scene. If you have really dry hands, then you're less likely to actually leave a print because it's the residue or the moisture that's left behind on the scene. And then the agent powders it or uses some sort of chemical, and that's actually what they're lifting from a latent print. the texture of the surface. So if I have a smooth surface, I'm more likely to leave a more clear print versus a surface that might be a little textured like a brick or a rock. You're less likely to leave your prints on there. And then you have other conditions like nature, the external conditions, like if it's raining, your prints might wash away. Or if you're wearing gloves, you may not leave a print at all.
So, are there certain substances that might be better in terms of collecting prints, or certain types of surfaces that are more likely to collect a print?
Surfaces that are smooth tend to leave a little bit better prints. Also surfaces that are less porous, so like this countertop or ceramic or plastic tend to leave a little bit better. Surfaces like papers are porous, so they tend to absorb a little bit more of the moisture, might not leave that good of a print behind.
And you may be intending to get to this in a little bit more detail in a few minutes, but looking now or talking about someone's known print or known prints, are there different distinguishing characteristics for each of us as to our fingerprints?
Yes, and I will actually be getting to that on the next slide.
Okay. Go ahead and let's talk about, with your latent print now and your known print, how are these identifications affected?
So that's actually the question, how are identifications affected? Prints are compared and identifications are affected by using a side-by-side comparison method. When there is sufficient quality and quantity of unique characteristics present, then we can actually go and make a determination. We actually call that ACE-V. ACE-V stands for the A, C, E, and V. A is analysis, C is comparison, E is evaluation, and V is verification. So if we go into the analysis portion, it's the quantitative and qualitative assessment of level 1, 2, and 3 detail, and the latent print and the known print. Level 1 being the more general, down to level 3 detail being the more specific, and I'll go into that in just a minute. It's sort of a data gathering session from the latent, and then I'm gathering data in the known print as well. So like I said, there's level 1, 2, and 3 detail. Level 1 detail is the most general. You're basically finding out, do I have enough information in this latent print to actually proceed? Can I go further in it? I can actually exclude people based on this, but I cannot identify with just level 1 detail alone. I can make a distinction if it's a finger versus a palm. I can talk about, or I can look at ridge flow and pattern formations, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So, like we had mentioned before, there are 3 main types of patterns that we look at: loops, arches, and whorls. So on the left-hand side, I actually have an example of a loop. A loop is when the ridges start on one side, generally tend to flow upward, and then exit on the same side that it came in on. So if you can see an example, enters on one side, flows up, and then kind of exits on the same side. The middle pattern is an arch pattern where the ridges tend to start on one side and then exit on the opposite side. So it almost kind of looks like a hill. And then the third pattern is a whorl, and ridges tend to flow in a circular pattern. So when I say ridge flow and pattern formations, that's what I'm talking about. We can then go on to an even more specific detail of level 2 detail. So we're talking about ridge events, and I'll talk about that in a minute, relative position to one another, and then the relative position to the pattern. So ridge events, we have 3 main ridge events. We have dots, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It looks like a dot. I don't know if you can kind of see within the red square. I've actually kind of pointed out a dot in the middle of the pattern. So the pattern is actually what we were talking about: loop, arch, and whorl. We're going to have the core in the pattern, which would be inner part. So at a loop, it would be the innermost loop of that loop pattern.
Lost you there.
Sorry about that.
After you talk about the core in the middle.
The core, let's say the core.
Slow down, if you would.
Sorry,
That's all
I
right.
get excited about this stuff. The core of a loop pattern would be the innermost loop that would happen within the loop of it. So I have this right where the red square would be your core, and then the black arrow points to a dot. Next would be a bifurcation, and a bifurcation is when a ridge starts and then forks out into 2 ridges. And an example of that would be towards the top, if you can see in the green box, that would be a bifurcation. And then lastly, we have an ending ridge. And an ending ridge is when a ridge flows and then abruptly stops. And I have an example of that in the blue box on the left-hand side.
And so when you look at all of these, are these basically distinguishing characteristics of a fingerprint?
Yes,
Is that a
it's
fair?
what we call minutia.
Okay.
So the ridge events that happen actually within the pattern itself.
Okay.
So then I can go even to further detail to the level 3 detail. You may not be able to see level 3 detail in all prints, but when you do, it makes it even more specific. We're talking about minute ridge detail, the width of the ridge, how fat it is, the shape of the ridge, does it look like it's square, does it look like it's round, creases, scars, pores, and like I said before, the ridge shapes. So
Let's slow down just a little more.
I have an example of pores up on the screen. The black lines are the ridges itself, and then the white dots are the pores that I was talking about before that exude sweat and perspiration. I'm also going to put a circle up on a ridge ending, and that is just to kind of show how fat a ridge gets and the width of the ridge. If you go above the circle, and there's one ridge that flows, if you see the shape of it, it gets a little bit fatter, and then as it kind of goes down, it gets a little bit skinnier. So this is all level 3 detail that I'm looking at, and it's just more specific detail.
Is your ability to identify level 3 detail in a print, is it based on the quality of the print that you've been able to obtain?
Yes.
And so in addition to, we talked about how there might be times when fingerprints are left behind versus times when they might not be left behind. Are there also times when, you know, the quality that you might actually have a fingerprint, but it's not a complete print? Can you talk a little bit about that? Or a deep...
The latent print examination is kind of like taking a photograph and looking at your photograph. Sometimes your photographs are a little bit blurry, but you know that it's, let's say I took a photo of a tree. It's a little bit blurry, but I know that that's a tree. If there's a better quality photo where it's been zoomed up a little bit, then I could tell you the specific little leaves on the trees. So it's kind of like that on a latent print. Not every print is going to turn out beautiful because you have a 3D surface, your fingers, touching a 2D surface, and it's a chance impression, so it's not always going to be left behind.
And so the different quality of latent prints not only has to do with maybe the manner in which they're collected, but also the manner in which, you know, an item was touched. Is that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
So once I've done the analysis of the latent print and then the known print, I can actually move into the comparison phase. The comparison is actually examining the attributes between the analysis between the latent print and the known. I'm looking for agreement of these attributes, but I'm also looking for discrepancies. Do they match up or don't they match up? So at the bottom of the screen is an example of it. On the left is the latent print, and on the known is the right. On the right is the known print. I've chosen these two prints because they were easier to see from across a courtroom, and they're pretty clear. These are also under a controlled environment, so that's why there is a lot of detail and it is pretty clear. So I've actually squared off a box on both of them just to kind of help zoom in on an area.
And is that similar to what you would do in the lab if you're looking at prints? Do you somehow mark them off and looking at them, or determine certain specific areas that you're going to look at?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So this is kind of just to show you how I would start a comparison and then do it. So on the left-hand side, once again, is the latent print, and on the right-hand side is the known print. I want to start by taking a target zone. A target zone is something that I see in the left or on the latent print that kind of sticks out to me, and I want to start from there. So if you look on the left, I have an orange arrow. On the end of the orange arrow is actually an ending ridge. That ending ridge is my starting point, and I want to see if I can find that in the known print. So on the known print on the right-hand side, I have an ending ridge where I can start. So I'm going to start from both these areas and then work my way from latent to known, back again to see if they correspond. So if I start from that orange arrow, the ending ridge, I'm going to go right one ridge and then right one more, and that becomes an ending ridge. So I'm going to see if I can find that configuration in the known print. So if you go to the known, you start at that orange arrow, go right one ridge and another ending ridge, and it's there. Okay? So then I'm going to go back to my latent print, let's say that we start at the red arrow, which is an ending ridge. I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges, and there's another ending ridge. And if I go above that, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's another ending ridge. I'm going to see if that configuration is in the known print, and it is. So from that very top ridge, bless you, that blue arrow, I'm going to go on the latent print, I'm going to go up 1 ridge, 2 ridges, and follow that ridge all the way to the right, and I see an ending ridge next to a dot. And I'm going to see if I can find that in the known print, and I do. So I go back to my latent print, and I count down 1, 2, 3, 4, and that fourth is an ending ridge in the yellow, and I will find that in the known.
And Agent Lipscotch, if I can stop you just for 1 minute, how are you determining how many ridges to count down and what points to examine or to compare?
It's based on your experience and training, but mostly I tend to work in a clockwise kind of fashion, but you're basically working your way through the print to see if I can find similarities. But at the same time, I'm trying to see if there are any dissimilarities. Is there a ridge in the latent that isn't in the known, or vice versa?
And it may be readily apparent to everyone, but an ending ridge, explain one more time what that is.
Sure.
Exactly.
So an ending ridge is actually what it sounds like. You have a ridge and then it just abruptly stops and ends. And then lastly, this is just for example of how I do my methodology. We start at that yellow arrow, that ending ridge, and we go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's an ending ridge right there. And I can find that. So once I feel like I have enough information in there and I've done my comparison, I look at, does level 1, 2, and 3 correspond? So remember, level 1 was just the overall flow. Level 2 was the actual dots bifurcations. Then I can go and see if there are, like I said before, any discrepancies that cannot be explained. And like I said before, discrepancies like, is there a ridge there that shouldn't be there?
Is there a standard number of points of comparison that you rely on?
No, there is not, because we don't just look at points. We actually look at the overall patterns. We look at the overall picture of what the finger looks like. I look at scars, and really there are no set number of points in a scar. I look at pores.
In your experience, have you ever found that 2 people have the same fingerprints?
No, I have not, and actually myself, I'm an identical twin, and I have compared my fingerprints with my sister, and we do not match. So once we've done the comparison, we can then make a determination. And like I said before, when there is sufficient quality and quantity of unique characteristics, then we can make that determination. There's 3 determinations: identification, exclusion, and inconclusive. Identification being when a latent examiner has determined that 2 areas between the latent print and the known print originated from the same source.
And when you, just for clarification, when you say 2 areas, I mean, you've shown us kind of how you do that comparison and pointed out 5 or 6 places that you might look at. When you say 2 areas come from the same source, are you talking about those 5 or 6 comparison points that you've made, or?
When I do say areas, it's more that we don't always get a full rolled fingerprint. We actually may just get a fingertip, or we may get underneath that core, or we may just get that little pattern of a loop. So it's a particular area that is matched.
And how, in terms of making the identification, in order to make a confirmation of an identification, how many matches are you looking for between the latent and the known? Is there a set number, or?
No. It's based on your training and experience and the quality of the print and the quantity of what you see within the print itself.
Okay. One of the things I didn't ask during your, when we were qualifying, is how many fingerprint comparison or analysis do you think you've done over the course of your career?
Ballpark, probably tens of thousands.
Okay.
Because you have to think you have one latent print card. That latent print card could hold 5 or 6 latent prints that was lifted from the scene. You then have one person that has 10 fingers and 2 palms, or you may have 5 people that you have to compare, so that's 50 fingers. etc. So we do quite a bit of comparison for latent prints.
Thank you.
Exclusion. Exclusion would be where the areas of friction-ridged skin were determined to not have originated from the same source. And then inconclusive, where we can neither identify or exclude the areas of friction-ridged skin as coming from the same source. Inconclusive can come because the latent print was of poor quality or clarity, there's just not enough information, or it can come from the known, where when the person had their prints recorded, there wasn't enough information, or it was too dark, or maybe their finger was bandaged or it was scarred. After we go through the evaluation, so we've come up with a determination, we can then go to the verification. It's when another independent analysis, comparison, and evaluation is done by another competent examiner. And that brings us to this particular case.
Okay, and so using your experience and the latent cards that have been collected by Agent Thompson in this case, did you in fact make comparisons as part of the investigation into the murder of Jose Perez?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, and in doing so, did you rely on certain known prints?
Yes, I did.
And could you tell us, just so that we know what those are, which known prints you relied on in making comparisons?
I did have in our system the known prints of Joanna Madonna, and I did do a manual comparison, manual being that it was requested that I manually compare her prints against the latent prints that were recovered from the scene.
And the prints that you had in your system from Joanna Madonna, were those live scan prints, or do you know?
Yes, they were live scan prints.
Okay. And I think we talked about that a little bit earlier, but the live scan machine operates. Tell us again how that operates.
Sure, it takes a digital copy of your friction-ridged skin. So like I said, it's almost like a scanner or a copier where your hand, you can be placed onto glass and it takes that digital copy, and then we can print that out onto the template card.
All right. In comparing the latent cards that were collected through the course of this investigation with the known prints that you had access to, were you able to make any identifications?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us about those?
Specifically for Mrs. Madonna, or?
Yes.
I did make 4 identifications in this particular case. 3 were on the vehicle itself, and then 1 was on a Rampage box.
Okay, and would that be a Rampage knife box that was collected as part of the investigation from the home of Miss Madonna?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and could you tell us about that comparison and identification? What did you base that identification on?
I do the manual comparison, which means I've got the name, the defendant, Madonna, and then I do my manual comparison, and I actually have kind of an example of it up on screen if I could use it.
Yes.
So the left is actually an example. I just zoomed in on the lift card itself. It's the latent lift card number 23, the bottom of the Rampage knife box. And I've actually just zoomed in on finger number 5. So that would be the right little finger of Madonna. And I'm actually going to kind of go through the methodology like I just did, but with this particular case. So for level 1 analysis, do I have enough information to proceed? And I believe I do. So the answer is yes. Can I distinguish between finger versus a palm? And I do believe it is a finger. What about the ridge flow? Remember, the ridge flow was based on basically the 3 patterns, the loop, arch, and the whirl. And the loop, I believe it could be the areas that the friction-ridged skin starts from, the flow starts from one side, flows upward, and then exits on the same side. I believe that it is a right loop, or it could potentially be a whirl, just because I don't see the bottom of the print. So when I'm starting to actually analyze the print itself and look for which finger this could be, I'm going to keep in my mind that it could be a right loop or a whirl.
Okay, and when you say you don't see the bottom of the print, why is that?
If you look at the bottom of this print, there's a little white void strip towards the bottom. That could be because it's the edge of the box. It could be that powder didn't fully adhere to that. It could be that the surface just never came in contact with the bottom of the finger. Remember, this is a 3D finger leaving an impression onto a 2D surface. So you're not always going to get every bit of that finger onto a latent print card. Okay? I'm sorry, onto a surface. So once I go past level 1, let's go into level 2 detail. And if I can refresh your memory, it's about ridge events relative to position one another and the relative position to the pattern. So once again, that was dots, bifurcations, and ending ridges. And I've just actually marked out a couple of what these look like onto the screen. On the left, the latent print. If you can look closely next to the red arrow, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit small, but there is a dot, a bifurcation, and an ending ridge. So once I've looked at level 2 detail, and if there's level 3 detail, we can go further into that, and there is level 3 detail on here. So level 3 detail was...
Can we go back to level 2 detail? Sorry for just a minute. And if you want to walk through, it looks like that there are 3 different areas there, perhaps that you looked at. If you can just walk through those.
Well, level 2 detail is actually concerning with the whole print itself.
Okay.
So where I see dots, bifurcations, and ending ridges, what I have up here is just an example of what each dot, or well, a dot would look like in the print itself. I will go through a little bit more of pointing out more of each, but this was just kind of an example to just to remind you of what level 2 detail would be.
And so all of those things that you've pointed to within the exhibit, those are the labels of the different differentiating characteristics of the fingerprint. Is that inaccurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And remember, during the analysis, I'm not exactly comparing them. I'm just doing the analysis of the latent print, what I see in there, and then of the known print. So level 3 detail, remember, was how fat the ridges are, the shape of the ridge, creases, scars, pores, and particular ridge shapes. So I'm just going to show you an example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on each one, and this is the analysis of the latent and then analysis of the known. So this is that I put a green box, and that is actually what I've zoomed in on. The arrows are pointing out what a pore looks like. And I know we kind of saw that before, but this is what a pore looks like in the latent print, and then what a pore looks like on the known print. Like I said before, there are several factors that affect the quality of a latent print and a known print. You can see kind of areas that are maybe a little less clear. It's just if your fingers are more dry that day, you may not get more of a clear print. And then I've also pointed out ridge shape and width of the ridge. So if you can see with the red arrow, if you start from the bottom of that particular ridge and work all the way up on both sides, you can actually see how the ridge starts a little bit fatter and then starts to thin as it goes up, and that would be an example of your ridge shape or the width of the particular ridge. So once I've done analysis for both of them, I can go into the comparison phase, and this is kind of where I'm going to mark up about 10 minutia, so 10 ridge events that I see. There are certainly more than 10 there, but this is just what I'm using for illustration. Because obviously we can see pores in there, and I'm not going to mark out every single pore. But if we start off with number 1 on the left side, which is the latent print, the left side is an ending ridge, and I'm going to try to find that in the right side. And I've marked that off with a number 1. So in the latent print on the left-hand side, we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges, and that's an ending ridge. I'm going to see if I can go down 4 ridges and find that ending ridge on the right-hand side, the known, and we do. So if I go back to my latent print as well, I'm going to start at the number 2, that ending ridge, and slide down to the left, and that actually ends as well, and that becomes another ending ridge. So that's what we call a short ridge. And it does the same thing on the known number 5 right finger. Okay, so on number 3, that ending ridge, we're going to go left 1 ridge and slide all the way down, and that becomes a bifurcation. So we'll start on the number 3 of the known, go left 1 ridge, slide down, and that becomes a bifurcation. On number 4, let's go back there on the latent print, you go over left 1 ridge, and that's another bifurcation right there. And the same event happens on the known. On the left, the latent print, once again, we go over 1 ridge, and that's an ending ridge that goes down. So that ridge started and ended abruptly. and we'll go back over to the known print, and it does the same there. Then we're going to go over 1, 2 ridges, and there's an upward ending ridge, and we can find that in the known as well. So we're going to skip over a little bit and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that 6th is an ending ridge, and we can find that in the known as well. Let's go up in the pattern, and we'll go 1, 2 ridges over to the right and up, and that's a bifurcation, and I can find that in the known. And lastly, if we started that bifurcation, follow that ridge all the way up and go over 1, there's an ending ridge, and I can find that right there. So I plotted out mostly just about 10, but like I said before, there's more information in there that I look at, but this is mostly for just illustration of what I did. So once I've done the comparison, I can then make an evaluation. So for this lift card number 23, the bottom of the Rampage knife box, finger number 5 was identified of Joanna Madonna 1 time, and it was verified by forensic examiner Julianne McManus on June 26th of 2013.
And tell us just briefly what the verification process is.
It's another examiner, another competent examiner doing the analyze, comparison, and evaluation process over independently. And I believe that's it.
Okay, and when they verify it, they basically have reached the same conclusion that you have, is that?
They don't have to. They are doing their own independent analysis, comparison, and evaluation. So if they don't believe that it is an identification, they will not verify it.
And so in this case, was it verified because they made the same conclusion that you did?
Yes, ma'am.
Based on your experience in latent print examination, are the points of the comparison on the lift card 23 bottom of Rampage knife box conclusive as to the identity of that particular latent print?
Yes, it was identified as finger number 5, right middle of Madonna.
Of the defendant.
Of defendant, yes.
Thank you. You can take a seat, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our afternoon recess at this point. During this time, it is your duty not to talk among yourselves. You can do that. During our recess period, do not talk among yourselves about this case. Do not talk to anyone else. Allow anyone else to talk with you or say anything in your presence about this case. Anyone communicates with you at all, let the sheriff know. Going to do an individual research or investigation unknown about any issue touching on this trial. And do not form or express an opinion about this case during this time. That while everyone else will remain seated, I'm going to excuse the 13 of you and ask you to return and assemble the jury room 10 minutes after the hour before. That's your excuse.